The accident happened on a Tuesday. One moment, Elena Vasquez was rushing across the street to her daughter's school recital. The next, she was lying in a hospital bed. Doctors telling her she'd never play piano again. The drunk driver had shattered her right hand beyond repair. The same hand that had earned her a scholarship to Juilliard 20 years ago. The hand that fed her family through private lessons in their cramped apartment above the bodega. 6 months later, Elena sat in the darkness of her living room staring at the silent piano that now mocked her from the corner. The insurance money was gone, spent on surgeries that promised miracles but delivered only more disappointment. Her daughter Maria needed new school clothes, but Elena couldn't bring herself to touch the keys, let alone teach again. Then came the knock. "Mrs. Vasquez?" The voice was small, hesitant. Elena opened the door to find a boy of maybe 10, clutching a crumpled $20 bill. His clothes were too big, hand-me-downs that spoke of a family stretching every penny. "I heard you teach piano," he said, eyes bright with desperate hope. "My mom works double shifts at the hospital, but she saved this for lessons. She says music is the only thing that might keep me out of trouble." Elena's throat tightened. I don't teach anymore." But something in the boy's face, a familiar hunger she recognized from her own childhood, made her pause. "What's your name?" "David. David Chen." That night, Elena learned that David lived 2 blocks away with his mother, a nurse who'd immigrated from Taiwan with nothing but dreams for her son. The boy had been teaching himself on a broken keyboard from the thrift store, practicing in the hospital waiting room while his mother worked late shifts. Elena found herself saying yes. The first lesson was awkward. Elena's damaged hand couldn't demonstrate the pieces she once played effortlessly. But David didn't seem to notice her limitation. He was too absorbed in finally touching real piano keys, too grateful for someone to guide his eager fingers. "Your left hand," David observed during their third lesson. "It's still perfect." Elena looked down, surprised. She'd been so focused on what she'd lost, she'd forgotten what remained. Slowly, Elena began to rebuild. Not her old repertoire, that was gone forever. But something new. She learned to teach differently, to show David how melody could flow from one hand while the other provided rhythm. She discovered pieces written specifically for the left hand, compositions born from other musicians' limitations. Word spread through the neighborhood. Mrs. Chen told other parents at the hospital. Soon, Elena had a waiting list of students, children whose families couldn't afford traditional lessons but who hungered for music the way she once had. There was Sofia, whose grandmother had fled violence in El Salvador, but still hummed the folk songs of her homeland. Miguel, whose stutter disappeared when he sang but who'd never had the chance to learn an instrument. Aisha, whose parents worked 3 jobs between them, but somehow scraped together lesson money, because they believed music might open doors their own circumstances had closed. Elena's apartment filled with music again. But it sounded different now. Not the pristine classical pieces she'd once mastered, but something warmer, more alive. Her students played with passion over perfection, with heart over technique. The breakthrough came 8 months later, during the neighborhood's annual street fair. Elena had been reluctant to participate. What could she possibly perform with one functioning hand? But David had an idea. "What if we all played together?" he suggested. Different parts, different hands, but one song. They chose "Imagine" by John Lennon. Simple enough for beginners, meaningful enough for a community that knew struggle intimately. Elena would play the left-hand melody, David the right-hand harmony. Sofia would sing in Spanish, Miguel in English. Aisha would provide percussion on a small drum. The day of the performance, Elena's nerves nearly overwhelmed her. The crowd gathered around their makeshift stage, neighbors, shop owners, people who'd watched her journey from accomplished pianist to broken woman to something she was still learning to define. Her left hand trembled as it found the opening notes. But then David joined in, his melody weaving perfectly with hers. Sofia's voice soared above the music, clear and strong. Miguel sang without a stutter, Aisha's rhythm holding them all together. The crowd fell silent, then began to sway. Some wiped away tears. Others pulled out their phones, not to record but to call family members saying, "You have to hear this." When the last note faded, the applause felt different from any Elena had received at concert halls. This wasn't appreciation for technical mastery. This was recognition of something more profound. Music as connection, as healing, as proof that broken things could still make beauty. After the performance, Mrs. Chen approached with tears in her eyes. "David practices 4 hours every day now," she whispered. "But more than that, he talks about you. About how someone who lost so much could still give so much. You've taught him more than music." That night, Elena sat at her piano. Not the expensive grand she'd once dreamed of replacing, but the old upright that had witnessed her transformation. She played a simple melody with her left hand, the same hand that remained whole while everything else fell apart. For the first time since the accident, she felt complete. The story could have ended there, but life rarely ties itself up so neatly. 3 months later, Elena received a call from the Lincoln Center. A video of their street fair performance had gone viral, seen by millions who shared it with comments like, "This is what music is really about, and I'm crying at my desk." The invitation was unexpected. Would Elena and her students like to perform at a benefit concert for music education in underserved communities? Elena's first instinct was to decline. Lincoln Center was where professionals played, not a broken pianist and her ragtag group of beginners. But David overheard the phone call. "Mrs. Vasquez," he said quietly, "you taught us that music isn't about being perfect. It's about being real." The concert was held on a rainy Thursday evening. Elena's students wore their best clothes, still not fancy but clean and pressed with care. They'd practiced for weeks, not just the music but walking on stage, bowing, managing nerves. The hall was only half full, but it included music teachers from across the city, journalists, and a smattering of society donors who'd come out of curiosity more than conviction. Elena walked on stage slowly, her left hand steady, her right hanging uselessly at her side. David followed, then the others. They looked impossibly small under the bright lights. 6 months ago, Elena began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall, "I thought my story was over. I was a pianist who could no longer play, a teacher with nothing left to give. But these children taught me that music isn't in our hands, it's in our hearts. And hearts, no matter how broken, can still beat." What followed was 20 minutes of the most honest music Lincoln Center had heard in years. Not technically perfect, but emotionally devastating. Elena's left hand danced across the keys while David's right provided counterpoint. Sofia sang a song her grandmother had taught her about hope surviving darkness. Miguel spoke the words when singing felt too hard, turning his stutter into rhythm. Aisha's percussion wasn't just keeping time, it was heartbeat, breath, life itself. The audience sat in stunned silence when they finished. Then someone in the back started clapping slowly, deliberately. Others joined, until the applause became thunderous, people rising to their feet not because protocol demanded it, but because something profound had just happened. The reviews were extraordinary. "Music as it was meant to be, not performance but communion," wrote the Times. "These children and their teacher have redefined what it means to be whole," said NPR. But the real change came in the weeks that followed. Calls poured in from schools wanting to start similar programs. Elena found herself consulting on new approaches to music education, showing teachers how limitation could become innovation, how brokenness could become strength. A year later, Elena stood in front of a room full of music educators from around the country. Her right hand still hung useless at her side, but her left moved expressively as she spoke about teaching children who come from neighborhoods where hope is rationed and dreams are luxuries. "We think of music as something pure, separate from the messiness of life," she told them. "But that's not where music lives. Music lives in the spaces between notes, in the silence before the song begins, in the moment when someone who thought they had nothing left discovers they have everything." After her presentation, a young teacher approached, a recent graduate with calloused hands and determined eyes. "I want to do what you do," she said. "Teach kids who need music but can't afford perfect." Elena smiled, remembering herself at that age, full of classical training and romantic notions about musical purity. Then you need to understand something, she said gently. The music isn't in your hands. It's in your willingness to be broken open, to let students teach you as much as you teach them. That evening, Elena returned to her apartment above the bodega. Maria was at the kitchen table doing homework. David was practicing scales at the piano, and 3 new students waited their turn on the old couch. The space was crowded, chaotic, filled with the sounds of imperfect music and perfect joy. She'd never gotten her hand back, but she'd found something better. A life built not on what she'd lost, but on what remained. And what remained, it turned out, was more than enough. The piano teacher's greatest gift hadn't been her technical skill or her prestigious training. It had been her willingness to begin again, to find new ways to make music when the old ways no longer worked. In the end, that's what real music is. Not the absence of mistakes, but the presence of truth. Not perfect hands playing perfect songs, but broken people making beautiful noise together, proving that harmony is possible even when everything seems out of tune. And somewhere in that crowded apartment, with children learning their first scales and a one-handed teacher discovering new ways to create wonder, music lived exactly where it belonged. In the spaces between what was lost and what was found. In the silence between heartbreak and hope. In the moment when someone reaches across difference and says, "Let me show you how to make something beautiful from whatever pieces remain."